We are live. Really excited that this is episode 68. I don't know how we got to episode 68, but here we are. The title of today's episode is Your Work Worth It? Rethinking What Makes a Job Meaningful. Really thrilled to have my friend Jen Tosti-Kharas join us. She is a professor of management at Babson College and co-author of the book Is Your Work Worth It? And Jen, just to start us off, is what's on your mind?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jeff. This has been a long time coming, and I'm really happy to be here. So what's on my mind right now is unavoidable when I step foot on Babson College, which is we are preparing for commencement, graduation. And so I happen to teach this semester a class that was all graduating seniors, which meant that, let's start with the positives, that they were about to take what I was teaching them about the nature, culture, and future of work, including they read excerpts from my book that Jeff mentioned. And they're immediately about to put it into practice because they're immediately going to this next step, to the real world, to learn all about work culture firsthand. The downside, of course, as you might imagine, of teaching graduating seniors is senioritis is real. And I was just before we got on this call grading the final exams, and it's let's just say it's the time of semester everyone's done. But so I've been thinking a lot about, what advice would I give to graduating seniors, and what do they need to know now that they're hitting the real world. And I think a huge part of what I think about there that's kind of relevant to the topic today is, what is a realistic expectation of one's first job? We know that it's very unlikely that people hit it out of the park, especially with their first job out of college. So to find something that's deeply meaningful, feels like it's helping others or doing good in society, making you enough money to live on, especially here, a lot of our students want to either stay in Boston, already expensive, or move to New York, even more expensive. So, how do you cover all those bases? And I think it is very difficult in the first job. So what do you trade off?
So I have a question on that subject, Jen. As the kids, graduating seniors, are looking for jobs, do you help them kind of rank and weigh the criteria and think of what's more important? Because I seem to remember that there were some processes that were literally like blind cow looking for pasture, right? So is there now a more thought out, better process that would help them make more informed decisions and improve the odds of getting a pretty good job that they'd be pretty happy with?
Well, so relevant to that question, what a lot of students said, because by the second semester of their senior year, I would say the average Babson student already has a job in hand. A lot of them they put a lot of emphasis on that junior year summer internship and hope to convert it to a full-time job if it's gone well. So a lot of them said something like, I wish I had this class before I chose my job, basically, because a lot of them admitted that they went for things like you would expect: firm prestige, fancy sounding job title, making a ton of money. And one of the things we really try to get them to do in the class I taught was not only say, what do I want based on kind of me and my values and my preferences and maybe my family situation, lifestyle needs, things like that, but actually how does the broader culture fit in and inform why I want what I want? So how are my definitions of success, not just up to me, but actually out there in the culture? And, of course, like many schools, Babson enjoys good rankings in part based on our ability to place people at fancy firms, making lots of money, all this kind of stuff. And, at what point do students kind of say, do I want what I want because I actually want it, or because I've been told to want it? All of which, so this is a long way of answering your awesome question, which is, no, I don't know of a strict ranking. It would be great to have some sort of like a ranking algorithm that could somehow calculate the opportunity cost of going for meaning, prioritizing meaning over money or something like that. I don't know such a tool, but I try to teach them some frameworks just that will be helpful. Sorry, Eric, go ahead.
No, yeah, I was going to say, just digging in on the culture side of things. And to your point, probably a lot of people don't look at the culture enough, but how would you tell somebody who's presumably not been in similar roles, or if they have, it's been as an intern or whatever, how would you tell them, how would you advise them to assess the culture of a company without having the background to know how to do that?
So
we're not all that good at anyway, even if we do.
No, this is such a perfect question because it just so happens this is a really unique class, and it's unlike any of the other classes that I teach at Babson. It's one of my favorite classes to teach. I co-teach it with a film historian who is she's a cultural historian, and film is her medium. So every week we show them a different movie about work and then talk about it. And so just as many management professors teach, things like leadership and strategy through the use of business cases, this kind of Harvard business case method is typical, where you're asking them, put yourself in somebody else's shoes, try to make the decision as they would. It's no substitute for first person experience, but it kind of gets us closer. Like, let's act as if I were this leader. Movies. And here I would also say, TV shows. There are so many good TV shows about work, books, literature about work. I mean, even going back, my co-author Christopher loves to quote Tolstoy and the death of Ivan Ilyich. I mean, if he were here, he would literally want me to say the words death of Ivan Ilyich, because he always says it's not War and Peace. It's 100-page short story, but it really covers what it means to put your work first and get to the end of your life and then ask, did I make the right choice? Which is, by the way, also what Ikiru, the classic Japanese film, does. So anyway, we show them films and we ask them to get in this mindset. We literally show them, like, you'll probably know some of these, Office Space, the classic.
I wrote that down as, like, do you show the Office Space?
So this is what's hilarious. We show them Office Space and they don't think it's that funny, which really makes me feel so old. Because at first we're like, how many of you have seen Office Space already? Keep in mind, these are all business majors and they are pretty typical college students. They're mostly like 18 to 22. We don't get a lot of non-traditional college students at Babson. So they're young, but they're business majors. How many of you have seen Office Space? No one, not a single person. And I said, in my day, I was an undergraduate business major. If you had asked this question, every hand would have gone up. They don't think it's funny. They think it's cringy. And they think the treatment of Milton, who's, the guy with the stapler, who's sent to the basement, they think he is like needs HR and he's in an abusive workplace situation, which he is, but they don't think it's funny. Do you know what I mean? Like, in the same way that I'm like, he was probably the funniest character. It just shows the generational shift,
Maybe they're right. I mean, maybe that's the problem, is like, we thought that was funny because you're like, ha ha, look what we have to go through every day. Isn't this funny? And they're like, oh my God, this is not acceptable, which is all probably true.
100%.
Which is fascinating because you think about it, that in some ways, the modern version of Office Space is Severance, and it is creepy, like horror.
So, full disclosure, I have not yet seen Severance, though everyone has told me that I should. And in fact, my teaching co-professor was quoted in the New York Times because they did this whole visual. It's a great story. I'll plug it. The visual aesthetic of Severance, actually, and how they portray the office environment really harkens back to a lot of classic films, like going back to literally like the 20s, black and white, not talking picture films. And Julie Levinson, my co-prof, walks through sort of all the references in Severance. So it sounds like a very deep show, but I really appreciate it. Like now we're veering more toward maybe away from, we had this wave of like The Office and Parks and Rec, and they were these like hilarious ensemble comedies, and now stuff's getting darker, right? And
well, and
what does that signify?
So it's interesting. I was at a dinner the other night with a bunch of marketers, and there was a whole conversation about AI, and I got kind of quiet because they were being all very negative about AI, and we were like, we do AI stuff, and but the general view is like, there's this meme out there, like, why is it that AI is taking, like, we wanted something that could do the stuff that we didn't like doing, not something that could come in and do the stuff that we do like doing. And so I think there's this sort of like, I think, when you have a world in which the biggest stories are like the unbossing, the great unbossing, the elimination of middle management, the the fight over return to work or return to office or whatever, and AI is stealing our jobs. Like it's not a great moment for
well, my question on that is, this is what we know within the workforce, right? The younger cohort who is just joining, Jen, what do you think? Do you think they have some awareness of that, or they're just bright-eyed and happy to do whatever they scored of a job?
Yeah, I mean, the research on this says that the number one thing, Generation Z, they're our newest workplace entrants. We're by the way, we're all used to bashing the millennials, and now it's like, nope, new people to bash. Their number one concern in the workplace is job security and financial stability. And I think that is such a reaction to having kind of come of age in these last couple of years in COVID. And just showing that the world is turbulent, it's unpredictable, things you thought were taken for granted, givens like high school graduation, college graduation, going to college and having it be normal, can be disrupted at a moment's notice. All of us, right, experienced COVID in different ways and in profound ways. But I think for this generation in particular, it's really made them kind of cautious. But I actually, among their concerns, I have not heard that they are have a lot of trepidation about AI. I think, and again, this is anecdotal, this is not, based on research, but I think it is our generation, kind of the more established generations, because it's a threat, it's a change. We're not sort of these AI natives. In fact, my students were trying to make this really like compassionate claim that because they're this bridge generation that knew life like before AI and after AI, that they kind of can see it both ways. It's more like, I think of my kids are more the ones who are the AI natives. But I made the analogy, that's me and the internet. Like I remember, like, I went through high school. We didn't have the internet. Like I kind of got that when I got to college, typical Gen Xer, so we know it. We also know the before and after. So I think they're more comfortable with it, but they're not total natives. So it's like it's very interesting, but I don't get the sense that they are, to answer your question about like, or are they just more like excited to be there? I think that I don't think they're acutely worried about AI taking their jobs yet.
So I want to keep going on this generational thing, because this is something I wrote down from the beginning of this episode. Is like I take notes so I don't have to like keep things in my head. So generational was something I wrote down. There is a constant drumbeat of the next generation that's coming in is lazy, doesn't want to work, blah, 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 blah. And I've always been like, so I had some amazing millennials working for me, super smart, whatever. And I also feel like if every generation is always the next lazier one, it probably means that nobody is actually that lazy. I also, one last comment before I turn it over to you, is I feel like the equation for the generation that's just coming into the workforce versus the equation, at least in, sort of, white collar office jobs or whatever, it's just very different. You're getting paid, peanuts. You're being, you're being asked to do all kinds of work that, you know, is may or may not be aligned with what you were expecting to do, et cetera. And so it's kind of like we're asking them to be excited, motivated, or whatever, and then we're giving them the short end of the stick and blaming them for it. So anyway, your thoughts?
Yeah, no. So first of all, your instinct is completely right. And actually research would back that up. That, for example, the millennials, which again, cover of Time magazine, calling them the me generation, saying there has never been a generation before that is so entitled, narcissistic, lazy. So it's like they're lazy and they expect everything for free, right?
Yeah.
It turns out that's not, the research does not back that up. Basically, as a academic paper put it, every generation in its youth is a generation me. Yeah. And so your instinct that we just think that about the young people, and we love, like, we don't consider ourselves old people, but then we find ourselves doing this like us versus them, right? So like we're simultaneously not old, certainly, right? Like we're not, you know, elders in the workplace, but oh my God, those kids, you know, ... And then like insert grievances here. So studies and a problem with generational research always is that if you survey people at a single point in time, it's just going to capture that difference about who happens to be young now. But there are studies that methodologically can parse, you know, is it the age? Is it the historical time period? Is it actually something about this generation cohort? And it really does back up that we're very frustrated with new entrants to the workplace.
So I want to build on this point really quickly is, so speaking of this sort of like cohort effect, is I have this thought that, like, I've had this thought for a while that the big difference generationally, I think, is that like our parents were, you know, so our parents' were the like sort of like, you know, at least in our family, were first generation, you know, trying to figure stuff out. And then the next generation, like our grandfather didn't go to, on our mother's side, didn't go to college. He was building a shoe store, whatever, so that he could put his brother through college, whatever. And then the next generation, like, you know, our parents' generation all went to college. And there was this sort of belief, I think, that, you know, sort of like, hey, there was some, even if work was terrible and whatever, like, but this is bettering the family. And I just wonder if you look at sort of this current sort of generation that's coming in, looking at their parents, meaning us, and going like we're sort of the first generation that, you know, basically didn't do better than our parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this sort of view from the perspective of our kids kind of going, yeah, you know, I don't know if I really want to, like, the meaning isn't there. Like the working hard because I'm trying to, like, you know, set up my family for generations is like, well, that's not really a meaning anymore. Anyway, I'd be interested in your take on that.
So yeah, so not just that, but also how the heck am I ever supposed to, you know, own a home if I'm in, I mean, so all of us are in expensive suburbs of major cities. I was going to say 3 of us are in the Boston area, 1's outside of New York. These are expensive places. Like, how can our kids are looking, saying, how would I even make a foothold in this economy? Mm-hmm. I have student debt. I, you know, can't necessarily afford to live where I grew up or in the city that was next to where I grew up. You know, jobs make no bones about the fact that they'd fire me in an instant in an economic downturn. Let's not even talk about how unstable markets and all kinds of things feel in this particular moment. It is a crazy, chaotic place. Oh, okay. And then I want to come back to Eric's point about, and are we just giving them bad jobs to do? So I'm fascinated. So I think, so coupling all of this together, I think that it is very different for kids today who kind of follow that same, and my family arc is very, very similar to the one that you described. And so you sort of maybe have imagine you've gotten used to a certain lifestyle that's not necessarily about, I know I just have to like patch it together to put food on the table. That's good, right? We want that for our families. We don't want them to feel like they're, you know, desperate living hand to mouth. But what is the upside? Like, what is the work about if it's not about that? And then maybe it's not necessarily intrinsically fulfilling. Here's where, actually, to bring it back around to the AI conversation, I've heard things like, we should AI outsource any of these sort of entry level, more mundane work that often would be the job of the entry level person right outside of college, and just kind of skip that. And then take it right to kind of that next level up of maybe the, white collar manager or whoever's doing the sales, and the classic example I hear for this is lawyers, law firms, and the legal brief prep. Like, AI can do that. It's legal research, it's compiling documents. Like, AI can do that really well. But people say part of the training of a lawyer, and especially if you're going to then go on to be a litigator or someone who's, dealing directly with clients, you need that pre-work, right? You need to spend time having done that legal brief preparation so that you have the professional knowledge to go to the next level. So I think there's something very interesting with what are the role of these early career jobs? Are they mini apprenticeships? Are they training grounds for what's to come? If we can outsource them, should we? What's missing? Like, that's where my mind goes in this conversation around sort of what's going on in the early career space, because I think that's kind of fascinating.
So it is completely fascinating. And I want to throw in another kind of consideration, and that is generational values, right? Because we were, just like I think Jeff talked about, told, well, we would stick it out because we have to do well, because this is what we do, right? And, we would make bad jokes about bad work environment because that's what we do,
Yep.
right? This generation has different values. They are, in my opinion, more kind and more considerate to themselves and others, I think, than we were at their age. I think they're more kind to the environment. I definitely think that kindness and consideration are the words in many cases. How does that play out in this complex scenario where my job might be an AI job, and what do I do, and all the money and, prestige and paying student loans that you talked about? How do values play out?
Yeah. I mean, the other one I want to throw on top of that, I think you're completely right. I mean, again, that's why they don't see office space as being funny at someone's expense. They immediately empathize and they immediately want to help. They're like, where was the HR? Where was the, and and they're more inclusive, right? I think they're more open-minded toward all kinds of things that were different in, ourselves at that age. The other thing I want to layer on that came out loud and clear, because I ask my students about what are their priorities and what are their values. And I give them this typology about, how much time and effort do you want to spend in work, in leisure, in volunteering, in civic engagement, in your family. And they're like, you're leaving out a category, and that category is health and wellness. Like, they see that as a life domain. I was surprised by that. And they said, that's our number one priority, that basically if we are not, and here they mean physically and mentally well, it's like the oxygen mask example. Like, if we're not healthy, how can we possibly contribute to any of these other domains, work, society, family, etc.? I think studies show they're spending a lot of money in the health and wellness space. They're, spending a lot of time there. And so I think that's an interesting, like, they care about themselves, they care about others. That's the kind of workplace I think we all want to be in. But then do they have the power to really shape what that culture is? Or are they back to the point about, being judged by others? Are they being judged? Does that, I guess the question I have is, does that concern for others and concern for my own health and well-being, when you have bosses who may be Gen X and boomers who are more of the, well, I had to suck it up. Well, no one asked me, when I had a bad day on the office, no one asked me, do you need a wellness day? Like, is there some judgment there?
The problem with that is that the assumption by the elder in that scenario is that they're right, but actually, I think they're wrong. Anyway, before we run out of the 20 to 30-minute mark, I want to let Jeff throw in some questions from whatever LLM he's decided to talk to today.
Yeah, so I asked ChatGPT what are 10 funny and thought-provoking questions that you could ask Jen Tosti-Kharas. Blending her, it says, well, actually, here was its answer: blending her organizational behavior expertise with the themes of is your work worth it? So I always ask people, do you want absurd first or thought-provoking first?
Ooh, oh, absurd.
Let's see. All right. So let's do this one. What's the organizational behavior term for when your brain leaves a Zoom meeting for 12 minutes before your body does?
Oh my gosh, that is absurd. I don't know about such a. I don't write about it in the book. I'm
like this behavior never happened.
Where the heck are they getting that from?
It's making stupid stuff up.
I know this behavior certainly happens, but
to all of us from time to time.
I think we need an OB term for that. That's something different than just like disassociating, right?
Having an out of virtual office experience or something.
Yes, I love that. My out of office reply is like, if we could put that up on the screen, right?
My brain
here, but not here.
It's the Homer Simpson glasses with or was it Bart or Homer with the glasses with the eyeballs on it?
Yes.
It's that, but on Zoom.
Yes, exactly. Or just a loop, like a GIF loop of me nodding like I'm there, but I'm actually like off screen doing something else. That's funny. That is absurd. That I like that it came up with that. That's,
by the way,
telling.
We've determined that 4 out of 5, I'm using this sort of like trident gum approach, 4 out of 5 podcast jokes choose absurd when you ask them that question.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
All right. Well, this one, I don't know if this was absurd or thought-provoking, but it says, if someone says their job is, quote, fine, how many therapy sessions would it take to unpack what that really means?
This is one of those like, I am not a clinical psychologist. Any advice shared on this show is my opinion and not the advice of a healthcare professional. I do not think there is one magical number of therapy sessions. I mean, by the way, and this gets back to like, I got asked a lot back when quiet quitting, remember this term, quiet quitting? Like, yes. I'm showing up for my job and I'm doing the bare minimum. And I might say my job is fine. And my pushback to that, quiet quitting was always seen as this like horrible, horrible thing. And I was sort of like, when did it become bad to do your job description and not constantly feel like you have to go so far above and so far beyond and spend, every minute thinking about work, doing work. So it's an interesting, like, is fine bad? I mean, it's interesting. There's probably a lot of nonverbals that accompany the fine that you could be like, fine is like you're dying on the inside. Again, the eyeballs are spinning. Or is it fine? Like, actually, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny.
Could be worse,
It's so funny you brought up quiet quitting because there actually was a question in here that I didn't ask you, which was, have you ever seen someone try to quiet quit so hard they accidentally got promoted? Which feels very Office Space, right?
That is the definition of what happens in Office Space. So that is really
middle management.
Funny. That is real. Yeah, we like this guy. He's got leadership potential, and still my favorite line in Office Space is when they ask this one guy's trying to justify what he does. And they're like, what would you say it is you do here? And I just love that. Like, I would love to find a context in my life that I can ask someone at work, what is it you would say you do here? Because it's just hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how though, like just so much of, I think there's sort of 2 elements to people's work satisfaction, less about the meaning they get out of the work, but like day to day, do I feel like this is I like doing this, I like being here, whatever. And it's fascinating because I think one piece is like, there are absolutely structural things, organizational things, personality things that make people feel like their job is either great or miserable. Mm-hmm. But I also think that there are sort of personal kind of mindset things that can make your job really, really valuable. I was coaching somebody the other day, and and this idea came up of like, and I have to do blah blah blah, and I was like, but you like doing that, you actually get to do that, right? Like so how do you like this idea of like, if you can actually train people to sort of stop looking for the negative and actually see like what the positive is. Actually, this a woman we had on a couple weeks ago, Elizabeth Lotardo, was talking, in her book, she talks about, is essentially she's talking about the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon, that when you see a red, or when you're buying a red car, you see red cars everywhere. And she talks about this idea of like, if you are primed to think work is going to be terrible, work will be terrible. And so I almost wonder, it's interesting, and maybe this is some of what you're accomplishing in your course, is like, we actually should spend some time with people entering the workforce, like training them how to, function in a work environment, not just like, how do you do accounting, but like, what's the right mindset to have? And like, how do you, I've been doing workshops on like managing up. I'm like, I've never seen anybody train anybody on managing up before I did it, like whatever. I'm sure other people do it, but like, just train people, like, how do you manage your boss? How do you, if your boss is micromanaging you, like, what can you do to deal with that? There's no like sort of standard way of training people how to do that. At least maybe you are, but like, I've never seen it. So
we're starting, actually, but it's like, we're starting. This has not been part of like the undergraduate business school canon, actually. And I agree with you. So, I mean, I think this idea of what are the realistic, like, what are the expectations of work that are reasonable? And we sometimes refer in organizational behavior literature to a realistic job preview. Like, what are the signs that something's actually wrong versus, ooh, I didn't like, as you're saying, not liking every minute of every day at work is not a red flag. That's reality, right? So a little bit of a level setting that a bad day doesn't mean you've made a bad choice. It doesn't mean, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about just this like upward or downward spiral where you kind of get in this bad negative mind frame, and then everything you see, and it just kind of, it can either level off or it can keep spiraling down. And the worst is to make a self-fulfilling prophecy where I expect everything to be bad. I expect everyone to treat me badly. I show up in a way that is not my best self, and I'm hostile or resentful or whatever it is. And then I find myself not getting opportunities. And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, not because that was a foregone conclusion, but because I kind of like made my own fate in not a great way. So at Babson, we are starting with courses on, if you will, professional skills. I mean, again, I think of course, I'm going to, hype my own course where we're talking about, what is in the culture that is leading to my expectation that is maybe a little less accurate in any given job. But I love this idea of, what is realistic to expect? What is it like on the job? What skills do you need? Managing up, I think, is huge. I get questions about that all the time. And these are skills that anyone can learn, but you have to be taught. People often, a huge thing I get, especially among my MBAs, everyone thinks the soft skills, if you will, are common sense. And then when they get into the workplace and find how hard it is, they think, what's wrong with me? If I don't know the stuff that's supposed to be common sense, the problem must be with me, rather than saying these are skills based in evidence that anyone can learn. So we're getting there.
I was just doing a book club sort of conversation with a book club at a company this afternoon. And I was talking about this idea that I believe that part of, what we call imposter syndrome is that when you are put into a job where you need a set of skills that nobody has ever taught you, your assumption is, like you said, there must be something wrong with me. If this were hard, I would have been trained on how to do it. And because I wasn't trained, it must be something wrong with me. And so I'm not going to say anything because people will find out that there's something wrong with me, right? And so they don't say anything, and then things get harder, and they, and they start to spiral and all that kind of awful stuff. And so it's just it's an interesting question. Like, maybe, I mean, I remember in my MBA program, like, I don't think they it was a great program, but they never trained us on like, hey, here's how to, they trained us on how like business writing or whatever, but they didn't train us on like, how do you manage your boss and what does it look like to, and surely I'm like, surely there's like, research and thinking around this, like that's what you do, right?
I think it's a part of like who defined culture then when we were in these roles, right? There were no such questions.
Right.
Because the bosses were coming through the culture of you tough it out, you cry and go home, and that's what we got. And you got a bad boss. Well, that's your problem, right? And now things change, and these questions surface up.
So I'm going to have to jump in. I'm going to have to jump in here because we are past the end of our conversational time. But before we go,
that went quickly.
We would love, it always does. And we would love to, I have like 5 more questions on my list here, which I'm not going to get to, but before we go, we always like to have everybody go around and say one thing they want to leave our audience with. I always make the guest go first. Don't ask why, it's just something I do. So you get to go first and let us, what's one thing you want to leave our audience with?
Well, I often get the question, if I don't feel my work is that meaningful, what can I do to kind of amp up the meaning? And the thing that I always say is figure out who benefits from the work you do. And if that's not immediately obvious, like maybe that is why you're feeling a meaningfulness gap, it's not immediately obvious, dig a little deeper, almost like a 5 whys. Try to get to the root of who benefits. And if you can possibly interact with them, do so. That will immediately make your work feel more meaningful. And if you can't find it, that's probably a bad sign.
That's a great, I love that. Well, so Jen, before I give my one thing, what is the best, if people want to connect with you, reach out to you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
So 2 ways. Email is always great. Tosti-Kharas, my last name, Tosti-Kharas @babson.edu, or on LinkedIn. And the benefit of having a really unique name is it'll be me.
Awesome. Well, I guess for me, I think I'm going to just pick up on that conversation we were having towards the end there. This idea that it's not just, like I think that there's things that we need to do to make workplaces and work more meaningful, but also we need to train people, like you were just saying, to see the meaning in their work so that they don't sort of start to spiral and go, why am I doing this? Whatever. I think when you lose that, I mean, what is it? There's that Viktor Frankl quote, suffering ceases to be suffering when it finds a meaning, right? And I realized he was talking about something like bigger and more complicated than what we're talking about. But I think it's really true. Like how do you train people to have that mindset? And I will pass it over to Elena.
Yes, I love all of these conversations, and I would build on it. In the earlier we started, the better. Right. So we all have children of various different ages, and we should talk to them and their friends and push them to ask themselves these questions, because they would define or at least influence their professional happiness when they get to picking their jobs.
So I want to pick up on that theme that we've been discussing about the generations and I just want to emphasize that point again, that I feel like there's this assumption that the older generations got it all put together and the younger generation is lazy and doesn't know what they're talking about. And I would say, if I sit back and look at, and some of the, as we like to call it, corporate PTSD I've suffered or whatever, I actually think that the younger generations are onto something. They are right about so much more than I think the older generations at work give credit for. There is no reason why everybody should need to be miserable for 8 to 10 hours of every day. And so I would like to see a shift in people's assumptions that they've got whatever they grew up with is the right thing. Anyway, Jen, this was fantastic conversation. As you said, as always, it flies by. And we would love to have kept talking with you for hours, but we're not one of those podcasts that goes on for 3 hours like some of them apparently do. So it was great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
Thank you for having me on. I had a blast.
It was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.